There is a moment that happens to almost everyone. You try something new. Maybe you start learning graphic design. You open the software, create something, and it looks terrible. You try writing. The words feel awkward. You try speaking in front of people, and suddenly you forget everything you wanted to say. You try playing an instrument, learning a sport, starting a business, or creating content. And after struggling for a while, a thought quietly enters your mind. Maybe I'm just not talented. So you stop. Not because you have proven that you cannot do it, but because you have confused being bad at something today with being incapable of becoming good at it. And this is where the problem begins. Because many people spend years searching for their talent while never giving themselves enough time to develop one. But what if talent is not always something you discover? What if, in many cases, talent is something that becomes visible only after you have spent enough time doing something badly? When someone asks, "What am I good at?" they may appear to be asking a simple question, but usually there is a deeper question hiding underneath. They are asking, "What can I do that will give my life direction?" They are asking, "What if I choose the wrong path? What if everyone else discovers their ability before I discover mine?" And perhaps the most painful question, what if there is nothing special about me? This is why the search for talent can become so frustrating, because people often imagine talent as something hidden inside them, like a treasure buried somewhere in their personality, and their job is simply to discover it. Maybe one day they will suddenly try something and everything will feel natural. They will be immediately good at it. They will know, this is what I was born to do. But real life rarely works that way. For most people, ability does not appear as a dramatic revelation. It develops quietly, often through years of being confused, average, frustrated, and bad, which creates a problem. If you believe talent should be obvious at the beginning, you may abandon the very thing you could have become good at. Misconception 1. If I'm talented, it should feel natural. Imagine two people learning to play the piano. The first person sits down for the first time and struggles to coordinate both hands. The second person also struggles. Both make mistakes. Both sound terrible. But one of them decides, "I am not talented." The other decides, "I am a beginner." The difference may seem small, but psychologically, it changes everything. The first person interprets difficulty as evidence about their identity. The second person interprets difficulty as information about their current skill level. That is a completely different mental model. When you are learning something new, your brain is trying to build connections that do not yet exist. At the beginning, everything feels slow because your brain has not automated the process. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. At first, you have to consciously think about balance, movement, speed, and direction. But after enough practice, many of these things happen automatically. The ability did not suddenly appear from nowhere. Your brain gradually built the system. This is why something can feel unnatural at the beginning and become natural later. So the first mistake is believing, if I am talented, I should immediately feel comfortable. A better mental model is, natural ability is often the result of repeated exposure. The things you are good at today may feel natural because you have already spent years practicing them. You may have forgotten what it felt like before you knew how to do them. Misconception 2. Talent is the main reason people become excellent. We often see the final result: the successful entrepreneur, the incredible athlete, the talented musician, the person who speaks confidently, the person who seems naturally intelligent. And because we see the finished product, we assume the ability was always there. But what we usually cannot see is the invisible period, the awkward beginning, the years of repetition, the failed attempts, the embarrassing mistakes, the thousands of hours when the person was not impressive at all. This creates a psychological illusion. We compare our behind the scenes with someone else's highlight reel. You see a successful YouTuber speaking confidently in front of millions. You do not see the first video they recorded. You see a successful business owner. You do not see the years when nobody trusted them. You see the athlete performing at the highest level. You do not see the thousands of ordinary training sessions that created that performance. This is called the outcome bias. We look at a result and assume the result was obvious from the beginning. But success often makes the past look more predictable than it actually was. The person who becomes excellent may look as though they were always destined to become excellent. But many times, the path only becomes obvious when you look backward. This is why asking, "What am I naturally talented at?" may not always be the best question. A better question might be, "What am I willing to remain bad at long enough to become good at?" Because the beginning of almost every valuable skill is unimpressive. The beginner's trap. There is a dangerous period at the beginning of learning. You are no longer completely ignorant, but you are not yet competent. You know enough to see how bad you are. This is often when people quit. A beginner photographer starts learning composition. Suddenly, they notice everything wrong with their pictures. A beginner writer learns about structure. Now they can see how weak their own writing is. A beginner entrepreneur learns about business. Now they understand how much they do not know. This can feel like failure, but strangely, it may actually be progress. Before learning, you may not have been able to recognize your mistakes. Now you can. Your standards have improved faster than your ability. That creates a painful gap. You can see the quality you want, but you cannot yet produce it. This gap is one of the most frustrating experiences in learning, but it is also one of the most important, because your ability eventually has to catch up with your standards. The mistake is looking at the gap and saying, "I am not good enough." The more accurate interpretation is, "I now understand what good looks like, but I have not yet developed the ability to produce it." Those are not the same thing. Misconception 3. You should discover your passion before you start. This idea sounds reasonable. Find your passion, then work hard. But there is a problem. How do you know whether you are passionate about something you have never seriously tried? You cannot know whether you enjoy filmmaking if you have never learned how to make a film. You cannot know whether you love business if you have never tried solving a real business problem. You cannot know whether you enjoy writing if you have only written 3 times. Often, passion is not the starting point. Sometimes passion is a result of becoming competent. Imagine 2 people learning guitar. The first person is terrible for the first 6 months. The second person is also terrible. But after a year, one of them can finally play songs. Suddenly, the experience becomes more enjoyable. Why? Because competence changes your relationship with an activity. When you are completely helpless, an activity can feel frustrating. When you begin to understand it, the activity becomes more interesting. You begin to notice patterns. You begin to make progress. You begin to experience control, and control creates enjoyment. This is one reason people sometimes become passionate about things they never expected to care about. They became good enough to appreciate the complexity. So instead of waiting to feel passionate before starting, sometimes you need to start long enough for passion to have a chance to develop. The talent paradox. Here is the strange thing about talent. The people who appear naturally talented are often the people who started early. A child who begins drawing at age 7 may look naturally artistic at 20. But what you are seeing at 20 is not just talent. You are seeing 13 years of accumulated exposure. A teenager who begins editing videos at 12 may look naturally gifted at 20, but they may have spent thousands of hours developing an instinct for pacing, music, storytelling, and visual composition. The ability looks natural because the practice has become invisible. This creates what we could call the talent paradox. The more experienced someone becomes, the more natural their ability appears. And the more natural their ability appears, the more we underestimate the practice that created it. This is why beginners often make a dangerous comparison. They compare their first year with someone else's 10th year. Then they use the comparison to judge their potential. That is like planting a seed today and comparing it to a tree that has been growing for 20 years. The seed is not proof that the tree was more talented. It simply started earlier and continued growing. But what about people who are actually better at some things? This does not mean talent is completely imaginary. People are different. We have different interests, different personalities, different physical characteristics, different cognitive strengths. Some people may learn certain things faster than others. Someone may have a natural advantage in mathematics. Another person may have better physical coordination. Another may be unusually sensitive to sound, language, patterns, or people. These differences matter. But the mistake is treating an advantage as destiny. A head start is not the same as a guaranteed finish, and a slow start is not the same as a permanent limitation. Talent may influence the speed at which you learn, but it does not always determine how far you go. The 4 things people confuse with a lack of talent. Sometimes you think you have no talent, but the real problem is something else. 1. Lack of exposure. You have not tried enough things for long enough. A person who has tried 5 activities for 2 weeks each may conclude, I am not good at anything, but they may simply have not stayed anywhere long enough to move beyond the beginner stage. You cannot accurately judge your potential from a sample size of almost nothing. One bad experience is not a scientific conclusion about your ability. 2. Lack of feedback. You may be practicing, but you may be practicing incorrectly. Imagine someone trying to learn photography without ever looking at their work critically. They may repeat the same mistakes for years. This is why practice alone is not enough. You need information. What am I doing wrong? What improved? What should I change? Feedback turns experience into learning. Without feedback, you may mistake slow progress for a lack of talent. 3. Lack of patience. Some skills have a delayed reward. The first few months may produce almost nothing visible. You spend time learning. You struggle. You improve slightly. Then one day, the things that once seemed impossible begin to become easier. This is similar to compound interest. At the beginning, the growth appears almost invisible. But the longer the process continues, the more noticeable the results become. The problem is that many people quit during the period when the progress is hardest to see. 4. Wrong environment. Sometimes you are not failing because you lack ability. You may simply be in an environment that does not allow your ability to develop. A person may be intelligent, but surrounded by people who discourage curiosity. A creative person may be in a situation where creativity is constantly criticized. A business-minded person may never have access to the tools or knowledge needed to experiment. Environment affects behavior. The same person can appear completely different in different environments. A plant struggling in poor soil may not be a bad plant. The conditions may simply be wrong. This does not mean environment determines everything, but it matters more than many people realize. A better way to discover what you are good at. Instead of waiting for a magical moment of self-discovery, use a process. Step 1. Follow curiosity. Pay attention to what naturally makes you curious, not what looks impressive, not what other people praise, what makes you ask questions. Curiosity is useful because it gives you a reason to continue. During the difficult beginning, you do not need to be passionate. You simply need enough interest to keep exploring. Step 2. Choose something and stay long enough. Do not judge a skill after 3 days. Give yourself a real period of exploration. The exact amount of time will depend on the skill, but the principle is simple. You need enough repetition to move beyond complete beginner confusion. Otherwise, you are not really testing your potential. You are only testing your ability to tolerate the first few days of discomfort. Those are very different tests. Step 3. Look for improvement, not immediate excellence. Ask, am I becoming slightly better? Not, am I already great? A person who improves consistently may eventually outperform someone who began with more natural ability but stopped practicing. Your progress does not need to be dramatic. Small improvement is evidence that learning is happening. Step 4. Get feedback. Show your work. Ask questions. Study people who are better than you. Compare your current result with your previous result. Feedback is uncomfortable because it exposes weakness, but weaknesses that becomes visible can be improved. You cannot fix what you refuse to see. Step 5. Notice what you are willing to return to. This may be the most important question. After the excitement disappears, after the beginner's motivation disappears, after you discover that the skill is harder than you expected, what are you still willing to return to? Because almost every worthwhile skill becomes difficult. The question is not, what feels easy? The better question is, what difficulty am I willing to tolerate? This question reveals more than people realize. The final mental model. Maybe the biggest mistake is believing that your abilities are already fully formed, as if you were born with a fixed amount of talent, and your job is simply to discover what you have. But human beings are not finished products. We are developing systems. Your brain changes through learning. Your judgment improves through experience. Your abilities expand through practice. Your interests can change when your understanding changes. The person you are today is not necessarily the best evidence of what you can become. And this is why you may not have a talent problem. You may have a time problem, a practice problem, a feedback problem, an environment problem, or a comparison problem. You may have judged yourself too early. The most dangerous sentence a young person can say is, "I'm just not good at that." Because sometimes it is an honest observation, but sometimes it is a permanent conclusion based on temporary evidence. You tried something once. You struggled. You compared yourself to someone who had been doing it for years, and then you made a decision about your entire future. But perhaps the real question is not, what am I naturally talented at? Perhaps the better question is, what could I become good at if I stayed long enough to find out? Because talent is often not a door that suddenly opens. Sometimes it is more like a muscle. At first, there is very little evidence of what it can become. But with enough resistance, repetition, and time, it changes. And one day, something that once felt impossible begins to feel natural. Not because you finally discovered who you were, but because you spent enough time becoming someone you had not yet become.